Welcome back. What are some of the challenges with the Islamic education system as we see it today? Do we as a community need to think of new and innovative ways of delivering Islamic education? On our show today, we have with us educators and founders of a recently established Islamic school called Gibraltar Leadership Academy. The principal, Riyad Khan, and the vice principal, Omar, Essawi, will help us answer these questions and also share how they incorporate Islam within their education system. A full disclosure here, I am a regular volunteer at Gibraltar Leadership Academy. Riyad, Omar, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
So we're talking about Islamic education and rethinking Islamic education. So I want to start with maybe the basic. In your opinion and expertise, what are some of the gaps in the current Islamic education system that you guys have come across?
So I think that one of the biggest gaps that we have in Islamic education in relation to secular education is the physical facilities. A lot of our Islamic schools, unfortunately, because of funding or vision, don't explore facilities that have like a gym or outdoor space. We usually have to settle on like a unit, an industrial unit that we refurbish, and doesn't look so pretty from outside, and doesn't look so pretty from inside. I mean, a lot of our organizations try to do their best, but unfortunately, at least from an aesthetics perspective, that's one of the biggest gaps. So, sometimes we'll have schools with hundreds of kids, but then we'll have one gym. Right, and it needs to be shared equally amongst all those, and then basically everybody kind of loses out at that point.
What about from an education perspective? What are some of the gaps there?
So I think that one of the biggest gaps that we've seen is a lot of these Islamic schools, or our Islamic schools rather, are run by individuals who lack a background in education themselves. So they're not professionals in education; they're professionals in other fields. So while they may have some contributions to make in organizational culture, they don't necessarily relate to a teacher-student issues or challenges that a teacher may face. They're not able to empathize always in that regard.
Okay, so those are important points. So the physical institution, we're talking about teacher-student relationships and sort of the people that run it. So I know you guys started your own school, Gibraltar Leadership Academy. So how are you challenging and addressing some of those gaps? What are some of the core ideas that you've put forward with Gibraltar?
Well, I mean, in terms of facilities, we were lucky enough, at least for this year, to find a space that had a full functioning gymnasium. The classrooms were set up. There were purpose-built classrooms. So that almost answered that part of the equation. But I think in addition to what Omar mentioned, I think that the lack of vision and the lack of understanding of what education is, because we are educators, right? We started the school where we've been teaching for many, many years, and we have a vested interest in the school. We can bring in a lot of ideas that might not have necessarily worked in another institution because we see it from the student's perspective.
So what kind of ideas? Okay,
so for example, some of our approaches are a little bit different than what other schools might have. So we, for example, have a blended model of classroom. So we have a lot of in-class instruction, but a large portion of our classroom is online, right? So we make use of Google Classrooms. We have Chromebooks for the students in the school. So there's a lot of technology that we're able to introduce. So that's just one example of how we're trying to, push education forward, push Islamic education forward. And I can tell you right away that the students really were pleased about that, because when we got the Chromebooks, for example, you should have seen their faces, right? And they use it on a daily basis. The first thing they come when they come to school, they want to know, can we get the Chromebooks? Because they want to just jump straight into their education. As teachers, we put a lot of our materials online. It frees up a lot of our classroom instruction also, not to just focus on the content necessarily, but more so the skills that we're trying to implement within the students.
What would you guys say to someone? Yeah, those are innovative and new ways getting in with the times. So what would you say to someone who says, well, kids already have so much technology. They have their cell phones, they're on their computers at home. Is it necessary? How is it really taking education to the next step if you're introducing that within the classroom? So even like Google Classrooms, for example, how would you guys address that?
So I think that it speaks to our times, right? In the sense, like we just had students come back to us yesterday, some of our former students, and they reinforced that, you need to get students in the habit of learning to process material either before the class or, sometimes completely on their own. And that speaks to, Google Classroom mimics platforms that they would use in universities such as Blackboard or D2L or even Moodle. So when students have that opportunity to get used to that form of instruction, it better prepares them for post-secondary education.
So just putting that, so having those kinds of materials already on platforms that they know they're going to experience in university, sort of, you've had that experience where kids have come back and said that's actually been beneficial to them?
It has, and I mean, there are, educational studies that have been done on, say like the flipped classroom, where students are given material to prepare before they come into the classroom, and that facilitates, deeper discussion, deeper understanding, and it's just generally a more productive environment if students are primed before they get to the classroom. So we're not necessarily eliminating instruction altogether. What we're doing is we're putting the students in a certain frame of mind before they enter the classroom. So they're not coming in like necessarily with a blank slate. They're coming in with some knowledge that we can either reinforce or add to when they get into class.
And how are parents and parents and maybe teachers as well and students, how are they responding to, even flipped classroom, for example?
So there is a little bit of a learning curve, in terms of, getting kids who have been used to a certain form of instruction, getting them used to a new type of instruction. But the kids who, most of the kids have jumped on board, and they love it. I mean, to give you an example, I was in Ali's math class on Thursday, and I walked in and the kids already had their books open. They already knew what they were doing, and I asked them, I was like, did Brother Ali leave any work for you? And like, no, we already know what we're doing, right? And they're using the terminology as well. They're saying, this is a flipped classroom. Right? And
wow, that's
so
pretty impressive.
yeah, so like there's literally 15, 16 kids, they all had their books open and they were just working right even before I got into that room. So I think that the kids have bought in and they do understand the benefits, and the parents also understand that times are changing, and having the teacher stand at the front of the classroom and write on the board the whole 60, 70, whatever minutes is not the way education works as well. So our parents have, really bought in as well.
So I want to speak to a little bit, you already referenced it a bit, the traditional, teacher at the front, you have your usual desk. I know I've been to the school and you guys don't have that kind of a learning space. So talk to me a little bit about how you've spaced and structured your classrooms, and how that's impacted the students' learning.
So we've tried to provide flexible seating arrangements for the students. One thing that in our research we've found that people in general, not just students, even adults, we tend to operate better when we're comfortable, when we can find a space that works for us. So some people need to sit independently in a comfortable setting. Some people need to have that collaborative approach, sitting around a communal table, for example. So we've tried to provide opportunities for students to learn at their pace and to learn at their comfort level. And it just facilitates that learning, right? So it's important for us to just provide the opportunities. The traditional classroom setting that even myself, when I was growing up, what I'm used to, it's changed. It's not there anymore, right? Like you mentioned, technology, with the change in technology, with the change in pedagogy, we have to basically adapt. And even going back to your initial question about some of the gaps, I would answer that some of the gaps that we face is this lack of keeping up with what's happening in the public realm, or just in educational philosophy in general.
Okay, so these are very helpful points. Now I want to shift the conversation a little bit to Islam. So how do you guys incorporate Islam within the curriculum? Because it sounds like you're doing very innovative and different things, but then where does Islam fit into all of this?
So I've been an educator for many, many years, primarily in an Islamic education system. And one thing that I've noticed is that we assume a lot in terms of our Islamic knowledge with our students.
Yeah.
We assume just because they've been in an Islamic school from kindergarten and now they're graduating grade 12, that they're well knowledged about the deen, and they have a connection to their religion, they're confident Muslims, and unfortunately that's not the case. And what we're trying to do is go back to the basics and understand where are the gaps in these kids learning about their religion. We did a diagnostic test, for example, to see what's their grasp of the basic elements of the faith, right? So the 5 pillars, some historical events, the question of why, right? Why do we believe in God? Why do we practice that we practice? And you would be surprised, right? You would be surprised of the responses that we got. And it was a little bit of an awakening for us to see that, this is actually the level of understanding the kids have, and we need to kind of like work along with them to bring them forward.
So you found that a lot of kids didn't even have sort of the basics.
Correct, right? So what we've done, luckily for us, because of our flexible scheduling, we also have a daily, we call it leadership block, where we have scholars coming in, Islamic scholars coming in and talking to the kids about the basics, trying to create that connection from their heart between them and their religion, between them and their Lord, right?
So I know based on the way you're talking about, teaching Islam, it sounds like you want kids to really I guess, believe in the faith like wholeheartedly and really live it. So my question to you is, you guys are an Islamic school, right? That's correct. But your name is Gibraltar Leadership Academy. So how do you bridge that gap where on the one hand we're saying Islam is important, I want you to learn about it, let's live it and relate with it a bit more, but then in the naming of your school you kind of don't have that public outward, this is an Islamic school. How do you reconcile those two?
So I'm a product of Islamic school. I was in Islamic school from grade 1 to grade 10. And my experience in Islamic school was that it was very ritualistic. You learn how to pray, you learn how to fast, you learn how to do things. You don't always learn why to do things, or why we're doing things rather. And I think that we decided to omit the I acronym from our school because we want Islam to be something that is lived. We want Islam to be something that is a way of life. The Prophet peace be upon him taught us how to eat, how to put on our shoes, how to put on our clothes, how to look in the mirror, right? We learn how to eat properly because the Prophet peace be upon him was eating with a young child, and that's how we know how to eat from what's in front of us. So Islam is supposed to be a way of life, and that's what we're taught, in the Friday sermons and stuff like that. Unfortunately, where the gap is that we're not always taught how to make that a part of our life. So when we decided in the naming of the school, we were very conscious of the fact that we didn't want to just explicitly say that we're an Islamic school. What we want is to show that we're an Islamic school. We want our students to come out feeling like, I'm not alien to this society. I'm able to be a part of this society and maintain my religion and do justice to what the Prophet peace be upon him brought.
So then tell me a little bit about the name, because I know from my limited knowledge of history, there is a reference to Spain in that.
So yes, so Gibraltar is a mountain in Spain. It's called the Rock of Gibraltar. It actually comes from the Arabic term or the Arabic general that brought the Muslims to Spain. His name was Tariq bin Ziyad, right? So they named the mountain after him. And essentially why we had chosen Gibraltar and we're sort of focused on Muslim Spain is that the Muslims established one of the greatest civilizations in the world. At the time that the Muslims were flourishing in Spain, Europe for the most part was in their dark ages. So we had, there are historians that mention there were merchants on the street that could read and write, whereas in Europe the kings couldn't even spell their own name. Mm-hmm. There were merchants on the street that were reciting poetry and writing poetry, and we had royalty that were not able to do the same. We had individuals. The King of England sent his daughters to Granada to study with the Muslims because they understood that the Muslims were making progress in areas that they hadn't even begun to think about. And when we're looking at Muslim Spain, we understand that Islam and Muslims, were leaders in the world in not just, medicine, but also chemistry, engineering. They had paved roads. They had 50 hospitals in Cordoba before France had one, or Paris had one. Wow. So we were in the forefront of things at one time. And when we're looking at Muslim Spain and we look at where we are today, we've fallen quite far. Yeah. So our goal and our intention is to make our youth and our community an example for the world once again. I
think that just takes me back to thinking about Spain, so that was very helpful. I think you guys already addressed this, but just to have a more pointed discussion as we wrap up, what is the future you think of Islamic education system? I know you guys started a new school now with your own with different ways of learning, teaching, etc. That's one aspect of it, but thinking about it from a more holistic sense, we do have other Islamic schools that are opening up and that are thinking of doing things differently. So what do you think the future is for Islamic education? And what is it that we should be focusing on as a community?
Well, I think we've already started down that road. We've got the ball rolling by just collaborating with one another, right? Like I can tell you, once we started the school, we've been collaborating with key community partners in trying to push education forward. For example, we attended the Nasiha education workshop where we discussed mental health amongst youth, and so you had teachers from all different Islamic schools coming together. When I first started in Islamic education, that was non-existent. Mm-hmm. So that's just one example. There's the Ed Camp that we also attended, and similarly, where educators are coming, discussing working, collaborating, seeing
Educators from across
Islamic
the Muslim
schools
community.
predominantly, and that again, that's not, you know, when we talk about professional development, that's one of the gaps that we have in Islamic education. But more and more, I think, you know, educators are understanding that we need to come together, we need to work together. So I think that's a positive sign. But just generally speaking, if you're talking about the success of Islamic education, Islamic schools, and even Islamic institutions as a whole, I believe that the success will come when the community provides that support, when the community understands the need and importance of education to combat, you know, the issues that we face as a community, whether it be Islamophobia or identity. You know, we have to provide the support necessary, and it's not just, you know, monetary support. It's you know, being invested in the future of our community. So I think that's where we're headed, and I see a lot of positive results coming out of that.
I think this was a very helpful conversation, you know, framing and rethinking Islamic education. Thank you, Omar. Thank you, Riyad, for taking the time to come on our show.
Thanks for having us.
We'll take a break, and when we come back, we'll answer questions from you, our viewers.